Accused my husband's sister of wanting to sleep with him after she interrupted our pregnancy announcement, and now I've ruined Christmas. I'm a 24-year-old woman, and I've been married to my husband, who's 26, for 2 years now. We've been together for 4 in total. Things are honestly wonderful between me and his family. I feel like I truly belong with them. All except for my sister-in-law, who's 22. It hasn't been for lack of effort on my part. I've genuinely tried to forge a relationship with her, but my husband warned me at our very first meeting that she's extremely territorial about him. He wasn't exaggerating, she's made it clear over and over again. Looking back, some of her behavior is almost wild to recall. On my very first family vacation with them, she asked my husband if he would sleep in bed with her, a bold move, considering my father-in-law had booked us our own room. She's accused me of being some kind of gold digger or groomer, which is especially absurd since her brother's 2 years older than me. At our rehearsal dinner, she literally plopped herself down on his lap in front of everyone. I could go on and on with examples. Now, I do want to say, every single time she's stepped out of line, my husband and his parents have called her out. It's not like she gets away with it, but the moment anyone confronts her, she blames her behavior on her BPD, and then, magically, people just forget about it until the next episode. But after the absolute catastrophe she made of our wedding 2 years ago, she sobbed through the whole thing, and even pretended to faint during our first dance. My mother-in-law called her out right then and there, which was mortifying. My husband finally sat down with her and laid out some limits. Since then, while she still calls and texts him daily, she keeps her distance from me. Outward animosity is at an all-time low, and she tries to keep her attention-seeking at bay in public. All of that sets the stage for what happened tonight. Every year, my in-laws throw a huge Christmas celebration about a week before Christmas, and all the extended family comes. Normally, it's a great time, and for the last couple of years, I've managed to be civil with my sister-in-law, aside from her usual death stares. But this year was different. This time, my husband and I decided to announce that I'm 10 weeks pregnant. That should have been a joyous moment, except, as soon as the words left our mouths, my sister-in-law erupted. She stormed out, sobbing dramatically, and slammed her bedroom door. The room went dead silent. There were a few awkward congratulations, but mostly people just exchanged long glances. My mother-in-law rolled her eyes and got up to go after her. I stopped her, telling her I'd go instead, secretly hoping that maybe, just maybe, this could finally be the moment my sister-in-law would open up to me and finally explain why she treated me like such a threat. That was wishful thinking. I knocked, stepped in, and was met with her screaming at me to get out. I tried to talk to her, not even certain what I was going to say, but it barely mattered, because my husband and mother-in-law ended up following me into the room a moment later. My husband, not exactly gently, demanded to know why she always needed to make a scene and ruin things for attention. That's always been his take. Her problem isn't an unhealthy attachment to him, it's this insatiable craving for attention. But then, she shouted back at him, calling him disgusting. He was bewildered, asking her what she meant. And then she screamed, "You fuck her, it's disgusting." My husband, being his usual snarky self, fired back, "Yeah, sometimes multiple times a day. She's my wife, what's your point?" My mother-in-law laughed, and that sent my sister-in-law into a meltdown. She started screaming and hitting at him like a toddler completely losing control. Honestly, by then I was totally spent. Something just snapped in me. I can't remember everything I said, but I know I let loose. I told her the only thing that was actually disgusting was her emotionally incestuous fixation on her brother, and asked her, screaming by the end of it, if she actually wanted to F him, because that's certainly how it seemed. After that, she just curled under her blanket, sobbing. My husband tried to get her to come out, but my mother-in-law dragged us out of the room. When we got back downstairs, almost everyone had cleared out. My father-in-law looked about ready to hit someone. My husband and I made a quick exit, and I cried the whole way home. He tried to assure me that I hadn't done anything wrong, but I feel awful. I love my in-laws genuinely, and I don't want to ruin our relationship. Now it's late and I'm lying here, replaying it all in my mind, and wondering whether I was completely out of line for calling it out for what it felt like, maybe more than just a need for attention. Update 1. My husband just got off the phone with his parents, and I could hear the frustration in his voice as soon as he hung up. His parents are furious at my sister-in-law, and he turned to me, genuinely asking if I really thought she might think of him that way, that all of this was rooted in jealousy. He told me that, apparently, my father-in-law had been harboring some suspicions since last year. There was this odd incident where my mother-in-law and I were chatting about lingerie, just the two of us, and my sister-in-law suddenly locked herself upstairs for the rest of the evening. My father-in-law remembered it vividly and confessed he's been trying to convince himself there was nothing to it, but now he's not so sure. I told my husband that I wasn't convinced it was a physical attraction, but there's no doubt in my mind that jealousy is playing a huge part here. Whatever the reasons, it's got everyone unsettled. Tomorrow, all 4 of them, my husband, his sister, and their parents, are going to sit down together and have an open conversation about what's really going on. For now, things have calmed down a bit, and at least I can say nobody believes I ruined Christmas. I'll have more to share after their talk tomorrow. Update 2. I just woke up and, wow, I really need to set the record straight before diving into everything. I made a mistake earlier, my sister-in-law has bipolar disorder, not BPD. She first started showing signs of depression when she was around 15 or 16. Before that, the relationship between her and my husband was honestly just normal, if not a bit distant for siblings. This all happened before my husband and I got together, right in the middle of lockdown. My husband had to come back home from college, while both of his parents worked as essential workers. They knew something was wrong with my sister-in-law, and since my husband was suddenly living at home again, he was put in charge of watching over her. She had started seeing a therapist at that point, if I remember right. The worst happened while my husband was home with her. She attempted suicide, and he found her. She was admitted for 7 days and went straight into virtual outpatient care when she got out. That whole experience wrecked my husband. He took it all on himself, convinced he should have been more vigilant, as if just watching her more closely could have kept her safe. To cope, he overcompensated massively, waiting on her hand and foot, urging his parents to buy a baby monitor because a therapist recommended it, even moving his bed into her room so he could sleep right next to her. From what she's told us, she absolutely hated his constant presence and even teases him about it now. The entire family ended up going to therapy after her attempt. After a couple months of this relentless caretaking, my husband started taking medication for his own anxiety and OCD. He finally backed off and gave her the space she needed. Fast forward 2 years of therapy, he doesn't need the medication anymore. Later on, during the first few months my husband and I were dating, she went through a manic episode. She was committed again, but this time she was formally diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She's been continuing treatment ever since. Now, for a small update, this morning, my mother-in-law called and said she didn't feel comfortable with me coming over, for my own safety. She didn't want me to feel like they were keeping secrets or shutting me out, so she promised to call me during the family conversation. Last night, my husband's uncle was there. He's a psychiatrist, or something like that. Honestly, I'm not totally sure how he's related. He's the one who suggested this whole intervention idea, and he's going to mediate the conversation. He obviously doesn't treat my sister-in-law, but he does know a lot about her history. Even though my mother-in-law and my husband are on my side, I can tell they both secretly hope this is all just some big misunderstanding that'll blow over. My father-in-law, on the other hand, seems to have been paying closer attention. He doesn't have that same optimism. As for my sister-in-law, this morning she's pretending like nothing happened, just carrying on as if everything's normal. Right now, my husband's already on his way to their house. I'm just waiting to hear how things go. I'm anxious, but also hoping for some clarity. I'll let you know what happens next. Just the fact that my husband read through the messages and left this morning with a clearer understanding of what he's up against makes me feel like we're at least moving in the right direction. Update 3. I don't even know how to write this all out. Honestly, it feels like I'm living in some bizarre alternate reality. But here I am, typing it all out because I need to make sure I don't forget any details, and, honestly, this feels like the only way to keep my sanity right now. Ever since last night, I've been flooded with thoughts, and after reading through everything this morning, I shared it all with my husband right before he left. Especially all those implications and suspicions about his role in what's happening. Not long after he arrived, my Mill called me. The moment he entered the house, she put me on speaker. At least, I think that's what happened, and I silently muted myself, left to listen in without knowing if my Sil even knew I was on the line. Sitting there, I could hear all of them gathering, the scuffs of chairs, the tension nearly palpable. My Sil let out this huge dramatic sigh, an exasperated breath that immediately set my Mill off. She told her, right then and there, that enough was enough. She had to take things seriously and her behavior was flat out unacceptable and could no longer be ignored. I know my retelling may be all over the place, but I just can't bring myself to clean it up right now. The stress has me unraveling. There's something I need to say. My Sil has always had this weird fixation. She'd constantly bring up how I was raised super religious, how I was a virgin when I met my husband, as if that's some kind of personal flaw to be dissected. Eventually, things spiraled when my Mill, Phil, and husband all started to speak at once, their voices clashing, nerves frayed. Then Uncle stepped in, trying to calm my Phil down. I think he was about to get up, maybe even storm out, and meanwhile, I could hear my Mill and husband both crying quietly in the background. After that, everything became so still, just a drawn-out silence, punctuated by people sniffling. It's all a blur, but my memories start to slip here. Then my husband, his voice faint, said something along the lines of how he's replayed that night over and over in his mind, and never once did it matter that she was naked, never once did that detail even register for him. And, yes, I actually believe him. We've talked about that night 100 times, and not once in all those conversations has he mentioned her being unclothed. Another heavy, uncomfortable silence set in. Then, out of nowhere, there was this explosive sound. My Phil either threw or slammed something and stormed out of the room, his anger palpable through the phone. Still, no one directly answered the question. I guess this is important context. There's this modern trend where each of the bridesmaids gives the groom a boudoir photo as a wedding reception gag. We did that at our wedding, but my Sil refused and I just let it go. My Phil swept back into the room, demanding to know if the only reason Sil had even agreed to be a bridesmaid was to give her brother the chance to see her naked. Mill blurted out that she couldn't take any more, said she felt physically ill, while Sil just dissolved into tears. That's when my anxiety got the better of me, and I just couldn't listen any longer. I hung up, shaking. Not even 5 minutes later, my husband called me, his voice trembling. He told me he was on his way home, that after I hung up, no one spoke a word. He was sobbing so hard I barely recognized him. He said he needed to restart his medication, which I told him was the right thing to do. He also told me we have to move, pack up our lives and leave everything behind. I don't want that, but I can't see another way out. I have no idea what's happening with my Sil, and my husband told me he needs time before he can talk any more about it. I've never seen him this distraught over anything. Deep down, no matter how hard I try to reason with myself, I feel a gnawing guilt. Not for loving or marrying my husband, but for possibly fueling Sil's jealousy somehow. Maybe I shouldn't have been so open about my lack of sexual experience. I was so young, so naive when I met him. Now, I just sit here, utterly lost, with no idea how to fix anything or what I'm supposed to do next. Update 4. My sister-in-law is going inpatient. A few hours after my husband got home, he decided to call her to officially go no contact. I think part of him hoped, somewhere deep down, that this was all some horrible, twisted joke, that maybe he'd wake up from this nightmare. Instead, what he got was her having a complete mental breakdown. Out of nowhere, she brought up this one specific incident from years ago, something my husband had all but erased from memory. He was 18, she was 14, he had just woken up in the middle of the night and, as most men do, had a perfectly normal physiological reaction. As he was walking down the hallway toward the bathroom, she saw him, and her mind warped that ordinary moment into something else entirely. The next morning, in front of the whole family at breakfast, she brought it up, humiliating him without hesitation. He'd barely even been aware she was awake, and the mortification was branded into him for years. Their parents stepped in right away, reminding her that it was nothing but a normal thing, and she shouldn't spy on her teenage brother like that. Apparently, that awkward, deeply embarrassing moment was the seed that grew into her obsessive fixation. She started spinning out, telling my husband all kinds of truly vile things I don't even want to repeat. He tried to reason with her, told her, as gently but firmly as possible, that none of this was real, that whatever narrative she'd built in her mind had no foundation, that he had never, ever thought of her that way. The conversation took a darker turn. She threatened, yet again, to hurt herself, to make him love her again, as she put it, her words twisted and desperate. I felt the reality sink in. What choice did we have but to call for help? So, about an hour ago, the ambulance arrived, and I can't see how they'll let her leave anytime soon. Now my husband is reeling, all the confusion twisting into anger. Every emotion flashing across his face seems raw, justified. I don't blame him for feeling any of it, not one bit. Update 5. I thought last night was the worst it could get, but this morning made me feel like we've barely scratched the surface of whatever this is. I didn't sleep, kept jolting awake thinking I heard my phone ring, and when it finally did, it was an unknown number. A woman introduced herself as a social worker from the hospital, and before I could get my bearings she was calmly explaining that my sister-in-law was on a hold, that she was safe, and that they needed to confirm primary supports for discharge planning. She kept using the word spouse and my brain snagged on it. I told her that no, absolutely not, under no circumstances was my husband to be listed as anything but a family member with a no-contact note. She paused, then said they already had him listed because my sister-in-law had given them his name and they had to go by patient report unless he withdrew. I don't know if I've ever seen my husband move so fast. He took the phone, said he was not her support, not attending family sessions, not her emergency contact, and that his mother should be that person. They didn't argue. I could hear the clacking of a keyboard and the measured tone of someone trying to keep things tidy inside a disaster. The call ended with a date, 72 hours, reassessment then, and a murmur that there would be a clinician calling us again because she has made statements that involve him. My husband went pale at that. 2 hours later, the doorbell rang and everything inside me tightened. It wasn't who I thought. It was a detective, soft-spoken, with sleeves rolled to his elbows like he wanted to appear smaller. He said he was following up on a report from the hospital. My husband's entire posture changed, like he had to physically hold himself upright. We invited him in. He was careful with his words, asked my husband to tell him what happened last night, asked whether there had ever been inappropriate contact, and you could tell he hated even saying those words out loud in a living room with pictures on the walls. My husband's hands were shaking so badly he kept missing his mouth with the water glass. He walked him through everything, the announcement, the screaming, the years of weirdness, the caretaking after her attempt. He didn't deny the awful embarrassing moments from when they were teenagers, just told him exactly how they happened. At one point the detective asked a question that made my throat close. Had she ever tried to touch him? My husband said no. The detective nodded and wrote something down and told us, in plain language, that when someone is in crisis, sometimes they make allegations because their mind is trying to make sense of the chaos, and that his job was simply to note the claim and the context. He said there weren't grounds for anything beyond documentation right now. He told us to change our locks and to keep records. I barely had time to exhale before my mother-in-law called and then showed up because I didn't answer fast enough. She walked in holding a banker's box and her mouth was set in this flat line that made me want to hug her and run from her at the same time. She said she'd gone into my sister-in-law's room to get her charger and a pair of slippers and found a lot, and then she set the box on our table and looked at my husband like she was asking permission to open it. He nodded. I don't know how to describe the feeling of looking into someone's private world when that world is pointed at you like a weapon. There were spiral notebooks with dates on the covers and my husband's name written over and over in the margins, folded, college-ruled pages filled with imagined conversations that never happened, my name crossed out, replaced with hers. She had printed photos from our Christmases and weddings and had circled him, and in one, she'd scribbled ours under a picture of us cutting cake. There was a baby name list. I felt the air leave my lungs seeing our last name written after every single one. Under boy, she'd written my husband's middle name 3 times and drawn a heart around it, and then under girl, my own middle name with an arrow to replace. One notebook had an entire page where she'd written out my due date based on when we announced. She did the math, she guessed, and she was close enough to make my skin crawl, and under it she'd written I will be there. We were still staring at the pile when my phone vibrated with a text from my OB's office confirming the cancellation of my next appointment. My heart just stopped. I hadn't canceled anything. I called immediately, and the receptionist sounded flustered. She said someone matching my name and birth date had called an hour ago, said work had changed, asked to cancel and reschedule once moved. I could feel my husband listening even though he pretended he wasn't. The woman on the phone kept apologizing and then offered to put a password on my chart, a code word that had to be said before any changes were made. I said yes and told her the code and asked if she could please put a big bold note that only I or my husband could change anything, and even then only with the password. She did it right then. When I hung up, I realized my nails had dug crescents into my palm. Somewhere inside all that panic, my husband did something I wasn't expecting. He went upstairs and came back with his old orange pill bottle and set it on the table next to the box. He called his old psychiatrist and left a message, then texted the therapist he saw after her attempt. He sat down next to me and got very quiet and then said, almost like a confession, that he doesn't want to run anymore, that moving won't fix something that's this close to us. He said he wants to do this right, lawyer, locks, cameras, whatever it takes, but not uproot our baby from everything stable before it's even here. And then he looked at the box and said, dead serious, that he needed to go through it all with my father-in-law and that he wasn't doing it alone. He called him, told him what we found, and asked him to come over. He said yes before my husband finished the sentence. While we were waiting, it hit me in a wave, this dizziness that made the edges of the room go fuzzy, and I realized I was spotting. It was the smallest thing, just a pink tinge, but it felt like a bag of bricks landing in my chest. I told my husband and watched the blood drain from his face. We were in the car within a minute. The ER was a blur of fluorescent lights and softly stern nurses and my own ragged breathing. They sent me to a small room with a chair that reclined and asked me 1,000 questions, and then we were listening to a heartbeat we weren't supposed to hear for another 2 weeks, steady and unbelievably loud in that tiny room. My husband just broke. He cried in that quiet way that shakes a whole person. The doctor told me that stress does wild things, that light spotting can be normal, that the baby looked good for where we are, that rest is not a punishment but a plan. They wrote pelvic rest on my discharge papers and told me to call my OB. I told them about the password and they nodded like, good, good. On the drive home we didn't play any music. We just listened to our breathing calm down. When we got back, my father-in-law was sitting on our stoop with a hardware bag in his lap. He stood up, hugged me tighter than he ever has, then went around with my husband checking every window and door and installing longer screws in the strike plates. He didn't say much until he saw the box, and then he went very, very still. He asked if he could take the notebooks to scan and to give one to the detective. My husband agreed. Before he left, he told us he'd call the hospital and told them, flat out, that his daughter was not to have our address in her discharge packet and that, if anyone tried to triangulate it by using insurance or scheduling information, he would file a complaint. He also said he'd set up a meeting with an attorney for tomorrow morning, not because we want to punish her, but because none of us can pretend anymore that this is something that will evaporate if we will it too. An hour after he left, the hospital called again, this time a different voice with a different tone, clipped and professional. My sister-in-law had tried to call my husband from the unit phones repeatedly, and when she couldn't reach him she called my mother-in-law and told her that she, meaning me, was keeping them apart. The clinician wanted to confirm that the no-contact boundary was intentional and to ask if we'd be willing to be part of a family session by Zoom before discharge. My husband said no, and then the man asked if he'd provide a written statement about what had happened over the last few days, something, to plug into the chart so the entire treatment team had the same language. My husband said yes to that and hung up. He scribbled for an hour, standing at the counter like a student finishing an exam. I don't have any noble ending for this update. I'm curled on the couch in sweatpants my mother-in-law washed and left here during some earlier crisis I thought was huge at the time, and my husband is asleep in the chair next to me with his phone face down on his chest like he's physically pinning it away from himself. The house is quiet. The box is in the hall closet because I couldn't stand to see it. I can still hear that heartbeat in my head, loud and stubborn, a metronome cutting through all the noise. I don't know what tomorrow will be, but today was enough to prove to me that we're going to build our life with the doors locked and the lights on and the truth written down. Update 6. I didn't think paper could feel heavy, but the stack the attorney slid across the table might as well have been bricks. He was brisk without being cold. He kept pausing to look at my husband like he was measuring how much he could carry in one morning. We told him about the call from the detective, the unit phone, the box. He didn't flinch when my Phil set the notebook on his desk and opened to a page with my due date guessed out in blue ink. He just clicked his pen and said, "This is enough." He typed, fast, and then had us read each line out loud. No contact. No third-party contact. No showing up at home, work, the OB office, my parents' house. No direct or indirect messages. He said the judge would likely sign the temporary order ex parte and that we might get a hearing date as early as next week. He asked my husband if he wanted to be on it as a protected party. My husband didn't even look at me. He said yes. It felt like it took hours and also 10 minutes. We left with copies and a different kind of shaking than yesterday. In the elevator, my husband held the envelope like it was something alive. On the drive home, my phone made a sound I'd never heard before, this strange chirp that didn't belong to any app I use. A second later, my husband's phone did it too, and then a notification slid down that made my skin crawl. AirTag found moving with you. We both went very still. The car felt suddenly made of glass. My husband pulled into a grocery store lot and we sat with the doors locked while he hit play sound, and we waited for a noise. At first, nothing. Then a tiny, insect-like chime from somewhere low on my side. He got out and crouched and I could see him tracing the seam under the passenger seat with his fingers. It was taped up with painter's tape, the kind we keep in our hall closet. He peeled it off and held it up between his thumb and forefinger. The chime did its little cheerful beep again. It made something in me go cold. He put it in the glove box and we didn't speak until we were in the parking lot of the precinct. The same detective met us in the lobby. He didn't say good catch or anything like that, he just took the AirTag like it was a lit match and asked if we'd mind if he kept it powered so they could see what account it was registered to once they got the proper paperwork. He told us to turn off our Bluetooth and then said, almost apologetically, that sometimes it's not registered to the person you expect. My husband nodded like he'd been bracing for that answer since the chime. We were in the kitchen when the hospital called. New voice again, this time a woman who sounded like she was reading each word off a cue card she'd written herself. She said the hold had been extended. Imminent risk to self with persistent delusional content is the phrase that lodged in my brain and won't come out. She said a different team would be evaluating her tomorrow for a longer stabilization stay. I heard my mill crying somewhere behind her voice. I asked if we were required to participate in anything while a protective order was being processed. The woman said no. She said they'd note our boundaries and that all contact would go through my mill. Then she asked for our address again for safety care planning, and I realized in a single hot second that this is how things slip. I gave her my mill's address. She said that was fine, that a safe discharge address doesn't have to be the patient's family's home. I hung up and shook for 10 minutes. My husband's therapist returned his text and offered a slot this afternoon. They did a telehealth session from the office while I sat on the bedroom floor and folded laundry like the world hadn't tilted. I could hear him cry once, the kind of breathless cry that leaves a person hoarse, and then it went quiet except for his voice getting steady in that practiced, deliberate way that means he's building a plan brick by brick. When he came out, he had that orange bottle in his hand and a new appointment on the calendar. He told me the therapist said something simple that landed like a bell, that loving someone and refusing to be their target are not mutually exclusive. I didn't know I'd been holding my breath until then. My OB's office called me back themselves. Not the receptionist, my doctor. She said they'd put the password in bright red at the top of my chart, and then she said that a call had come in from someone claiming to be a home health nurse asking for a quick confirmation of my address for prenatal care coordination. They'd asked for the code. The caller hung up. I sat down on the floor in the hallway because my legs didn't trust me. My doctor said to come in next week instead of 2, that she wanted to lay eyes on me and give me a plan so I didn't feel like I had to white-knuckle my way to each appointment. She said, softly, that it's okay to make your world smaller when you need to. She didn't use the word safe, but I heard it anyway. By late afternoon, our front door looked like a project my Phil had been itching to do for years. There's a new deadbolt that clicks with a satisfying thunk, and a doorbell camera that shows us our own faces in unforgiving detail. He brought over 2 small cameras and set one facing the driveway and one at the back gate and then loaded the app onto both our phones. He handed me a little key lockbox and told me to put one spare in and never tell anyone the code. It felt extreme and comforting at the same time. He kept his voice flat and gentle and then out of nowhere he said, "I am so sorry I didn't see it," and my husband put a hand on his shoulder and said, "You did. You're here." I had to walk into the bathroom and just breathe because watching the two of them say things like that with their eyes and not their mouths almost broke me. Right around dinner, my husband's email pinged with an alert that someone had attempted to sign into his Apple ID from a device near the hospital. He changed everything while I sat there reading the numbers off a sticky note like a metronome. 2-factor on everything. I called my bank and put an alert on my card. We froze our credit. It felt both ridiculous and exactly right. The judge signed the temporary order. The attorney called at 7:12 and said the papers were in his outbox and that a process server would deliver them to the unit in the morning so there'd be no question that she'd been notified before discharge. He told us there'd be a hearing set for the end of next week and that we didn't need to be physically in the same building as her for that. We could appear by video. I didn't realize how badly I needed that last detail until it landed. I kept telling myself I would put the box out by the trash because I don't want it under our roof, but then the detective texted that he'd like to pick up 2 more notebooks if we were willing, and I found myself taking them back out and putting little sticky flags on the worst pages. There's one where she wrote my first name with his last name and then a slash with his last name alone and then scratched out mine so hard the paper tore. It's such a stupid little image, but it burned into my head. I put that one at the bottom of the pile and covered it with a towel like I was making something go away by not having to look at it. And then, because this day refuses to tie up neatly, the doorbell chimed and the camera showed my Mill on the porch with her hair wet like she'd just washed her face and couldn't stand being inside her own house another second. She came in and sat at the table and put her hands flat on the wood and told my husband that she'd spoken to the psychiatrist and that he'd used the words erotomanic, intrusive, and high risk all in one breath. She said they were talking about a longer term placement, something structured, and that the only way it would stick is if the whole family stayed aligned on boundaries. She said she knew exactly how hard she was asking him to be. She said she would back him in court. She said this without looking away and there was not 1 ounce of wobble in her voice. It was the strongest I've ever seen her. I am writing this from bed because the ER doctor's discharge instructions weren't a suggestion and because every time I stand up too fast my vision goes spotty at the edges. The house feels different now, less like a soft thing and more like a ship you have to learn how to steer. My husband tucked the temporary order in the drawer with our passports and then took a video of every room so the timestamps exist somewhere besides our heads. He's sitting on the floor next to me with his back against the bed, typing his statement for the hospital on his laptop because the clinician called back and said that, if we had it in us, details would matter for their decision tomorrow. He doesn't want his sister to disappear into a system. He wants a record that says, we tried, and then we tried differently. The baby is fine. I keep putting the ER wristband under my pillow like a rabbit's foot, ridiculous superstition from someone raised on logic and prayers. The camera just pinged and it's nothing, just a car going by and the little bloom of headlights on the wall, but I still feel my heart jump. Tomorrow morning a stranger will hand my sister-in-law a packet with the judge's signature on it, and my name will be in it. I don't know how to wrap my head around that. I only know that for the first time since this all started, there's a line on paper that matches the one we've been trying and failing to draw in real time. That, and the sound of that heartbeat in a machine-lit room, keeps looping under everything. It's the only thing right now that cuts through the noise.